Get ready for a journey into the mind of one of today's most innovative and daring authors. He's the creative force behind the dystopian masterpiece, Feed, The Astonishing Life of Octavian Nothing, and the whimsical adventure, Elf Dog and Owl Head. His stories have taken us from the far future to the heart of revolutionary era America, challenging readers to think deeper, question more, and see the world in ways they've never imagined. With prestigious accolades like the National Book Award and Newbery Honor to his name, he blends wit, satire, and insight in every piece of work he touches. So sit back, relax, and get ready to meet the man who's been pushing the boundaries of young adult fiction for years, M.T. Anderson.
Thank you for having me. I should have you walk in front of me to introduce me whenever I walk into a room. That was great. I feel much better about myself already.
You got this. Your novels like Feed and The Astonishing Life of Octavian Nothing tackle complex societal issues, making them both challenging and accessible for young readers. What inspired you to explore these themes, and how do you ensure they resonate with a younger audience while still addressing mature topics?
Yeah, well, I think the thing is that teens are aware of how the world is working, and even more importantly, they're aware of how the world isn't working. And it's, it's tough for teens because I feel like they wake up from childhood and suddenly they're confronted with a world with all sorts of complex problems that they did not create themselves. And so there's this kind of this sense of urgency with teens where they're sort of like, whoa. How do we enter into this world that has problems we did not create, and yet we somehow are going to be the generation that will have to solve them? And so I think that it's really important to talk to teens about things that are issues that are adult, because they, as adults, are going to have to be addressing them. And also, it's not just about anxiety of the future. It's also about the joy of being human and being part of the series of generations going back in time and future in time of humans. So it's kind of welcoming them into the human race also and saying hey, here we all are. So to me, writing books like Feed, it's the part of me that is still a teenager was very involved with writing that book, because I remember being a teen and feeling the pressure of sort of advertising already in my head. So sorry, that it's a book, for those who don't know, it's a book in which future world, everyone has a chip in their head that gives them instant internet access, but at the same time, they also have, because of that, constant flushing of advertisements going through their thoughts. I already had that as a teen, back in the 1980s. I had constant advertisements going through my thoughts. And it made me really angry that the way I wanted to be was sort of being criticized and that kind of thing by these voices in my head that were like, no. You should be like this. You should want these things. If you want these things, then you'll have friends, then you'll be in love, all that kind of thing. So it was very natural for me to return to that place emotionally and to write a book for teens about what that experience was like. And I feel so my answer is we're welcoming teens into the human race, which means into the joys and anxieties of being human too. So it's natural that we're going to talk about things that are of deep importance to us and to them.
Feed explores a dystopian future dominated by consumerism and technology, themes that seem even more relevant today with the rise of social media and AI. How do you think Feed speaks to readers now, over 2 decades after its release?
I really do hope that it does. In a weird way, I didn't, when I wrote it, and I wrote about that technology of the chip in the head, and I wrote about social media in a sense before there was exactly social media, before Facebook, that kind of thing. But frankly, the technology was not the important thing for me. Predicting the technology, that was an accident. What was important to me was actually just the experience of being in the middle of this kind of consumerist swirl where you always feel like you're being sold to, and where you build your identity out of the things that people are trying to sell you. So I was going for like the emotional experience of that more than I cared about the technology. And it's just a weird side, like accident that the technology happens to be real. One just funny thing that I accidentally predicted without any knowledge of it. Someone pointed out to me, I'd totally forgotten this, but someone pointed out to me on Twitter during the Trump administration, someone pointed out to me on Twitter that the president in Feed, which was written in 2001, so like long before Donald Trump ran for president, but the president in that book, who kind of like swears a lot and that kind of thing, his name actually is President Trumble. So it's like this near miss, and I was like, whoa, that was not like, I hadn't even remembered that was the guy's name in the novel, but there you go. Accidental prophecy.
When you were growing up, were there any books or authors that inspired you to become a writer? And how did these early influences shape your approach to creating stories now?
That's a great question. So I would say that like at two separate kind of ages, when I was a little kid, like 7, 8 years old, I really loved Dr. Seuss, the famous Dr. Seuss. And those are books, I think, that influenced me because they give a sense of unbounded imagination. Like the world can be anything, this sort of strange place with truffula trees and, whatever it is. So, and these bizarre creatures, I really loved weird monsters and things. So he does all these great creatures. So from that, I learned the lesson of unbounded imagination. A lot of his books from his middle period, in fact, are about like kids imagining this weird world. So, and then when I was slightly older, I read the works of Ray Bradbury, like The Martian Chronicles, Dandelion Wine, Something Wicked This Way Comes. So those are books where the point of them is sort of, they're fantasy novels or science fiction novels, but there's an element of them that is symbolic of real problems that real people have. And so I think that was what woke me up to that idea that, you can write about fantasy or science fiction, but in many ways you're writing about the world that already exists, not about an imaginary world at all. So I think that those are two phases of my reading that totally influenced me, that I feel like I've always wanted to be kind of like Ray Bradbury or Dr. Seuss.
Landscape with Invisible Hand touches on the issue like automation, economic inequality, and healthcare, which feel even more relevant today. How did these themes evolve during your writing process, especially as the world changed around you? And with so many books being challenged or banned lately, how important is it for authors to continue addressing tough, controversial topics?
Yeah, so these were topics that so this was written in 7 or 8 years ago now, I think, at this point. And by the way, it was turned into a movie last year, though they changed the plot a lot. It was turned into a movie with Tiffany Haddish and Asante Blackk. So it became a movie, though it deviates a lot from the book.
Did you like how much it deviates, or?
I thought it was interesting. The choices they made were very different than the choices I made. So I thought it was really interesting to see how they kind of reinterpreted it. But the themes were still the same. And I think that one of the reasons why they made the movie was because those are themes that are like perennial in American culture. Like, we always have these problems with, how are we going to, in between the American dream of of total liberty and the American dream of equality, like liberty and equality to some extent are at odds with each other. If everyone is free to do what they want to, that also means that people become extremely unequal. If everyone is flattened so everyone is equal, then there is not liberty. So in a way, I feel like these are issues that are always going to be true in the American Republic. And I wrote that book because I felt like it's a successor to Feed, even though it's not set in the same world. because Feed was about the experience back in 2001, 2002 of feeling like the whole world was selling to you. Whereas Landscape of the Invisible Hand is kind of about a different world that we feel now more after 2008, 2010, that kind of thing, which is where you feel like you are always having to sell yourself. I mean, you, for example, doing this podcast, right? Like you're always having to sell yourself. You're always being like, I wonder how I can like get more viewers. I wonder how the channel can get more viewers. And, all of us are engaged in this act of like trying to dog paddle our way into visibility somehow, And so I felt like that was important to write about. So that's a book where, for example, there's an alien race that is totally fascinated by the fact that humans fall in love. So the two main characters have connected themselves so that all of their experiences falling in love are conveyed to these aliens who don't fall in love and who are therefore totally fascinated by it. And they're trying to monetize it. Like the kids are like, well, we can sell our romance. And we do that. All of us do that, like online on Instagram or whatever. Like, look at my great life. And of course, it's really not exactly your life. It's a cleaned up version of your life. It's a life that looks more exciting and more successful than you probably actually feel. And I think we all are engaged in that thing of like trying to sell an image of who we are now. So that's a shift from in the early 2000s when I wrote Feed, when I felt like we're always being sold to. Now we're always selling ourselves.
How important is it for authors to keep addressing controversial topics?
Oh, well, you have to. I mean, like, what else are you going to write about? Like back in the knots when I was a young writer, I used to get people asking like, well, why do you always write about stuff that's so angry and political, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, well, we're supposed to write about what is important to us. And what's important to me is justice and the happiness and prosperity of my fellow Americans and of my fellow humans. And that's what's important to me. So for me, writing just a romance, it's not as important because I don't necessarily care a lot about the love lives of like imaginary teenagers. Like if they fall in love, if they don't, it's kind of interesting for me, but it's not like urgent. Whereas I feel like these other issues, and the world has really changed since that historical period. So everyone is now aware, I think, of all of the complex ways the world is I don't know, the things it's confronting us with. So, so now I feel like that's more taken for granted. But back then it wasn't. And I really feel like authors need to write about what's important to them. That's the reason to become an author, is to write about what's important to you. Also, you adopt values from what you read and that kind of thing. Not from one single thing usually, but like you generally get a sense of things. You know what I mean? And you generally get a sense of how the world is working. And just as one interesting, like you mentioned, the banning of books. One interesting banned books story that I have is, so Feed, this book, which is about like technology, AI, and its human interface and its interface, all that kind of thing. It was actually banned in Iowa by AI. So there's there's a city in Iowa that was like, oh, we have this new law, this bizarre law that was like, material that depicts sexual activity in any way can appear in school libraries anywhere in the state. And otherwise the penalties are very big. But this city was like, I don't know. Oh, we have a bunch of different school libraries. We have thousands and thousands of books. What do we do? So they just fed their list of books in their libraries into ChatGPT, which is especially this is like a year ago. So it's a really kind of clumsy AI algorithm too. It's not a nuanced thing. And they were like, tell us which ones we should ban. So it came up with 19 books that should be banned from those school libraries, of which Feed was one. But the weird thing, or not just weird, it's not just weird, but the awful thing is that most of the books on that list, they weren't books that were like sexually titillating. It wasn't like, ooh, I'm going to turn to page 54 and read about the sex scene. They were books that were honestly, most of them, very famous American classics that had to deal with sexual violence and that kind of thing. And it was things like, what was it? Was it, like Toni Morrison's Beloved, one of the great American novels. Great. And, I'm trying to think of some of the others. I think it was like The Bluest Eye was also on there. I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. So all of these books, and I've just listed 3 out of 19, are actually not just about sexual trauma, but they're also by African-American writers. And so it's like, these are the voices that are being silenced. The other one of the other books I remember is this book called An American Tragedy by Theodore Dreiser, which you probably haven't even heard of. It's kind of a very stodgy American classic in general. I think no one has ever described Theodore Dreiser as sexy. So anyway, but the point is, it's not just that the algorithm is incompetent. It's that the algorithm chose books that dealt with sexual trauma and silenced voices about that. And in particular, there are many teens who are going through that. So the idea of having these books that are about teenagers going through that kind of thing and rising above it, it's really important for them to be able to read that if they want to, to be able to read that, and also for friends who haven't experienced that to kind of understand it through those books. So it's not just a kind of a quirky thing that this computer algorithm banned these books. I mean, in my book, like, that's a different issue. You know what I mean? Like, it's a satire or whatever, but these are deeply important American classics. And the idea that you would allow a clumsy computer algorithm to decide about the intellectual life of your future community is absolutely outrageous. And it is a distortion of American values and a distortion of the idea of a great republic in which learning is available to all.
As someone who has written across many genres and tackled complex issues, what advice would you give to aspiring writers who want to address important themes in their work?
Well, I mean, I think, as I've said, I feel like this is a good era to do that in. When I began, there was a lot of resistance to that. There was this feeling of like, well, why are you always hurling all these issues at kids? And I'm like, well, because the issues are already there. Excuse me, my Octavian Nothing books deal with the question of like American slavery during the era of the Revolution, in the 18th century. And like, it has its impact even now. I mean, it's long after the abolition of slavery, and yet its impacts are still being felt. And we have to understand where we came from to understand where we're going. That's just one example. I feel like, you as a young writer, this is a good time. Things have changed since the era of 2002 when Feed came out, or 2006 when Octavian Nothing came out. This is an era when people understand the importance of talking about important issues, and issues which you might have a viewpoint that others don't share. Like, that's an important thing right now. And I think that's great that literature has opened up in this way. And I'm hoping that it leads to a greater national recognition and also a national healing. And so I would say, this is a great time to go for it. And this is an exciting time for that kind of thing. It's also a time when, because those conversations have bubbled to the surface, there are forces trying to clamp down on them. Political forces, quite frequently spearheaded by men, and I hate to say it, specifically by white men, because we white men have traditionally, we're used to a certain amount of privilege and power, and it's uncomfortable to think of the fact we might not have that. On the other hand, if we care about our fellow humans, our fellow Americans, we have to We have to find a solution that works for everyone. We have to recognize that we are part of a larger thing and that the American project is deeply important. And that's what we need to progress forward with.
M.T. Anderson's work continues to challenge and inspire readers of all ages, encouraging us to look deeper into the world around us and to think critically about the issues we face. Your stories offer not only entertainment, but also a powerful reflection on society. We are incredibly grateful for the time and for the impact your books have on readers everywhere. We look forward to seeing what you'll create next, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much.